Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to today's conversation on Gift of Healing TV. I'm Sara Jane, and I am delighted this evening, because it's evening for me, to be joined by my guests, Ilene Dillon. Ilene, hi.
Hi.
And Denyse Lefevre. Denyse, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
And the three of us, and sadly we haven't got Scott. He's traveling at the moment, so he's I think he's flying. So whatever. Anyway, he's traveling at the moment, so he's sadly not with us. But the three of us are all authors within the Gifts of Wisdom book. There you go, folks. And so what we're going to be doing is sharing the gifts of wisdom found within life's experiences. And the two topics we're going to be covering in this program are working with emotions and moving into a more heart-mind approach to life. But before we get into talking and sort of having this conversation, sort of Denyse, share just a little bit about yourself so that people get to know you.
Okay, so I'm a retired business executive who started yoga at the age of 16, and it helped me cure my anxiety, which is what I wrote about in Gifts of Wisdom. As I moved into the business world, I kind of forgot all about that. And then as I was approaching retirement, I returned to yoga because of some family health issues and my own. And it was that curiosity that put me on the path of becoming a yoga therapist. And I now work with seniors and people with chronic conditions.
Thank you. Ilene.
Yes, well, I have been a psychotherapist for 53 years. I'm in my 53rd year now. And I think that we psychotherapists get into psychotherapy to heal ourselves as much as anybody else. And I don't think you can really help people unless you do healing with yourself. I imagine you would both agree with me on that. I'm as we all are, I'm an Amazon best-selling author. I have my own book called Emotions in Motion. I was a professional speaker for 27 years. I had my own podcast, and now I'm writing and making appearances with the notion that I want to share all that I have been able to learn about emotions in the last 53 years that work to help people live the lives they want to live. And I'm very excited about doing that. And I haven't had the good sense to retire. I'm still.
But I have, seriously, the work that we're doing, do we ever really retire? You know, as much as I now can collect my pension, I haven't stopped working. I'm doing the things that I love to do. And so what's
Exactly.
saying, if you do what you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. So you know, it's one of those things. So it's right. Okay. So as we've mentioned emotions. So working with emotions. So Ilene, bearing in mind, I have the feeling it was you that chose this one. What do you want to share about it first, and then we'll go around the circle and make a conversation of this.
Well, I think these are very critical times in all of our lives, and they're critical because we're changing our notion, we're changing the idea of who we are, or we're becoming more than we have been. And that more has to do with spirituality, which is all about energy. And to me, emotions are energy. So, one of the best ways and the fastest ways we can make this transition into our more energetic selves is to get in charge of the emotions. And I have had the privilege, because I was very, very angry 50 years ago, of becoming a recovered angry person. And I've helped hundreds and hundreds of other people change their relationship, what I call realign with anger, so that life flows better, so that we can have the lives we want to have. And it also puts us in synchrony, in synchronization with the energy selves that we are becoming. And generally, when I've looked up resources in my culture in the United States here, uh, nobody talks. We say yes, emotions are energy, but it's not officially accepted. And until you accept a definition of what emotions are, you can't really. It's like not having a diagnosis for an illness. You can't treat it. And so that's my mission: is to help people understand that emotions are here to help us, and we can call on them to help us.
Denyse.
So I love the way synchronicity happens in life. I spent most of my career often being the only female in a room. And I learned early on that I had to stuff my emotions, especially those that were considered traditional female ones. I had a habit since I was a little girl, and my husband is actually the one that pointed it out to me. Being angry was not acceptable behavior. So I would cry. And so if something didn't go my way at work, I learned I had to run to the ladies' room to cry and hide it. So I really, really love being paired with Ilene today in this conversation, because part of what I'm trying to explore now is I developed what I call the behavior of being a chronic head dweller. And I'm now trying to connect with that heart or energy part of myself so that I can be a more holistic person.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? That it's get out of the head and into the heart, and this sort of follow your heart, but don't forget to take your head with you.
Yes.
So, because at the end of the day, we do require both, but it's which is the lead. And the story I shared within the book was very much at a very, very early age, spending my first birthday in hospital. And the emotions that must have been running through that little girl in hospital, being there for 3 months and seeing her parents once a week for an hour, the feelings of abandonment and rejection, etc. And yes, I had all of those, but a child can't put a name to those feelings. And it was a few years ago now. I remember I always would get really it was like those knots in your stomach. And I always considered they were about fear. But it suddenly started to make sense when I actually got to be on a program in this country called The Weakest Link. And I had to fly up to Scotland. And I couldn't go up the night before. I'd literally organised before they even sort of said, can you go, a workshop that I was doing here with people. So I was going to be flying up the following morning to record the program that day. And I was getting ready in the morning. I was in the shower and I felt this sensation. And I suddenly thought, it's not fear, it's anticipation of what's going to happen, of the fact I'm going to be a part of this, be a part of this program. And then I realized that for that little girl, it was always anticipation initially. But that feeling was then given that name of fear because for 3 months, every time they came, they left her. So sensations and things within our body, have we misnamed them because we didn't understand what was going on at the time we first felt them? And so they are emotions. We feelings, emotions, because they're things that are running rife through us.
You know, what's important there, Sarah, is that you don't necessarily have to have a name in order to work with them. And so, you could have that anticipation feeling and not know it's anticipation, but you could know it's the same feeling every time it comes up. And you can say, where do I feel it in my body? How, what's going on? If I'm feeling it right here, I can put my hand here and say, okay, what are you trying to tell me? And I can listen for that with my heart and follow up on it. So I have a bit of an issue. We tend to seem to want to name everything, and I don't think we have to name it in order to be able to work with it. I think that's drawing again from working with our brains and making our brains topmost. And I think it's Heart Math that has the Heart Math Institute has done studies that show that the heart brain is actually more powerful than the mental brain. And so we're all, I think, waking up our heart brain. I had some very difficult issues as a young child. Also, I was taken away from my mother and I never saw her again, much less once every week. And nobody, back in the days that I grew up, I don't know what about you, but people just thought children could handle emotions. Whatever came along, they were just resilient. So nobody ever talked to me about it. And I was really angry with my father, I remember, because he's the person who took me away from my birth mother when he came back from World War II. And I used to pinch him with my little 3-year-old fingers on his behind, his tender behind. And he felt it pinching me back. He said he didn't know how to stop me from doing that to him. And he wanted me to know what it felt like. But so at least I was getting something out. The thing about anger is that, like we've been talking here, we are taught to hold it inside, like you were saying, Denyse. You certainly don't ever let it show at work, whatever. And holding anger in particular inside of us is the worst way we can deal with anger. Why? Because anger is energy, like all emotions. And when we hold it inside, one of the things about energy is that it must move. So when we hold the anger inside, it's busy moving. And why is it moving? Because it wants to get out and move more. And what's the best way to get out? Through weak spots, just as if you found a hole in a dam, if you were a body of water. So they could find your gallbladder or your liver or your self-esteem or whatever. But that anger is constantly looking for a way out and is doing damage when it's inside of us. So what we want to do is acknowledge that it's there, which you did even when you went to the restroom, Denyse, for your crying. Acknowledge that it's there, and then we can work with it, find out what its message is, and let it go. And we now know this is repressed anger is a silent killer that people don't know about. We know that through research that repressed anger is a causative factor in the development of diabetes, heart and circulatory illnesses, and cancer, right? It's part of the cause of those illnesses. And it also has been shown that it creates, it gives impetus to the growth of the cancer once we have it also. And I think that I've been talking with people all over the world because I travel in my RV here, all over the North America. I will say I have been around the world, but all over North America, and people have no idea that holding anger inside is connected to their physical health.
Can I ask you a question on that point, Ilene?
Certainly.
I have this discussion frequently with my husband, who in many ways is very heart-centered as a male. I think it's because he was raised by a Puerto Rican mother, but he claims that his anger, and he does let it out, he doesn't hold it inside, is a male trait. And that men are naturally angry and they have to let it out. And of course, my brain kind of says, I don't think so. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, it's an interesting belief to start out with, and it sounds like it's a cultural belief. And so you may or may not ever see him change that. But part of my search as a person who discovered when I was 27 years old that I was full of anger was, what is the cause of anger? Why? People say, oh, well, there's so many different causes. Well, yes, there are, but there's one basic universal cause that all those other things are connected to, and that is that we carry beliefs in our brains about how the world is supposed to work. And the simple example, you've probably heard me say this before, is being a driver on a freeway and having other drivers cut in front of you. Almost everybody reports that they get angry about that, right? Now, why do you get angry? We get angry because we have something. It's like kind of like when you were in kindergarten. You should wait in line. You should not take the last cookie. Those kinds of rules and beliefs come into us as shoulds. So when I'm on the freeway, somebody cuts in front of me. My belief is you should not cut in front of me, right? But we know that people, all kinds of drivers cut in front of one another. And so it's an erroneous belief. It doesn't work. And we're getting angry because we think something should not happen that happens all the time. How silly is that? And so where that led me is that anger actually is trying to help us to see where we have mistaken ideas about how the world works, right? So if I look honestly, I'll say, well, to me, about half the drivers on the freeway cut in front of me. So the next time somebody cuts in front of me, I have a choice. I can say, oh, I'm so mad at you. Or I can say, oh, so you're part of the 50%. Okay. And then I don't get angry. The anger just disappears. So the way I hear the issue with your husband is that, number one, he and the people he grew up with don't know this, and most of us don't. And number two, it's he doesn't have an alternative to explaining why he gets angry. And number three, I would also suggest, I don't know, but I would suggest that in the culture he grew up in, it was more acceptable for men to get angry than for women. And therefore, this idea that you could keep whatever should you want and keep as mad as you want got built up. And it's not necessarily that men have more anger or get more angry. It's that they've been given permission to do it. And it's cultural permission. And so that's the way they interpret that cultural permission.
Yeah, I look at it as they release it more readily, where in my culture, we were taught to stuff it. And so when he feels it, it comes out. And so, I mean, I think in my mind, at least, I get it. We may both have the same level of anger. We just deal with it differently. And I was just curious about what your take on that was.
Well, he's not anymore getting in charge of anger than you are, however, right? Because he's just allowing it to rage through him without knowing what's causing it and what he can do with it. So emotions are, I've been fascinated with the fact every one of us for centuries has emotions. We have them at least from the moment we're born to the moment we die. Even if we have Alzheimer's, we still have emotions. And yet, in these days, we know so little about emotions. If you go on the American Psychological Association or American Psychiatric Association websites and ask for a definition of anger, they don't give you a definition of anger. They just tell you how it behaves. but they don't tell you a definition of anger. And, my husband, who died 9 years ago, he was a brain surgeon. And he told me, look, you can't treat an illness unless you have a good diagnosis. And so part of what I'm talking about here is we need to diagnose anger differently. Anger says to us, you think something should happen, and then it does, so you get angry, or then it doesn't, and so you get angry, and you think it should not happen, and then it does, and you get angry, right? That's the whole issue with anger, is that we have these ideas. And when I look further, what's the point of seeing that we have these ideas? So we can change them, so we can update and be in the world more the way it is.
Going back to the point of sort of the holding the anger in, I've sort of thought for a long time. There was a Reiki session I did with somebody, and although I'm not somebody who sees things, hears things, or whatever, I got to the solar plexus, and it was as if the lid had been taken off the solar plexus. But I see the solar plexus as being like a well, that all the unresolved things that you haven't dealt with have just been poured into this well. And so it's like full of so much gunk. I mean, it was a horrible mess. Because as you were saying, Ilene, these things will come back to bite us. They affect our physical body, because whatever it is we haven't been able to deal with in childhood, we don't understand. As we get older, I haven't got time to deal with that now, I'll deal with it later, and we never do. So it sadly goes on throughout our lives that we have this stuff we don't deal with, but it's stored in our body. I just see it as being in our solar plexus, the core, the heart of our being. And it will then come out. And as you said, sort of cancer and various other conditions, those conditions are our body telling us that there is something deeper to be dealt with. If you've ever read the book, The Journey by Brandon Bays, she had a football-sized tumor in her stomach. And rather than letting them operate, she went on a very strict organic everything diet to really support her body. But then she also created a technique which became called The Journey, which took people into not really meditation, but took people back to a childhood aspect of themselves, to see where and what. She got rid of that tumor without it having to be operated on, because she went in and she found the root cause. So it required both. It required the physicality of what she was taking into her body was healthy, but also the releasing, where's the root cause, and the releasing of that. And yeah.
Well, I didn't do quite as good a job as Ms. Bates did, but in 2017, I was diagnosed with a breast cancer, and it was a small, slow-growing one. I was just about to take off in my van, and I told the doctor I don't want to have it removed because I want to see if I can heal it. And I did work on releasing anger. I went there, and I also ate a raw diet, and I took supplements, and I did Qigong, which is an energy medicine, and drove my family wild. They were going, why don't you just cut it out? But my husband had just died of cancer, and I didn't see a lot of effort being made to heal him. I just saw, so I wanted to see if it could be healed. Well, I was working with the head of breast oncology surgery at Duke Medical Center. And so she was looking after me and cooperating with me in my experiment, which was wonderful. And at the end of the year, the tumor had not disappeared, but it also had not grown at all. And it was very small, and she took it out, and I didn't do chemo or radiation, and I've had no recurrence. So I totally get it that, we can heal these things. Pretty much we're talking about reversing in many ways what we've been doing that got us in the mess in the first place. I can't say that we can guarantee that everything can be fixed that way, but certainly a lot can be.
Yeah. Denyse, any thoughts?
No, I'm thinking, I kind of look at everything through the lens of my yoga teaching. And yoga teaches us that basically we are all one. We are beyond the body. And in one of the meditations that I teach on a regular basis, which I actually teach to cancer patients, it's to connect with that oneness, that true self. And then in that process, we ask them to notice emotions, notice sensations, and notice where they feel it in the body. So I think there's an importance to recognizing, first of all, that you're having those emotions, because in my case, I spent a lot of time denying them. And then once you recognize them, you have a choice. You can either deal with it head on, or in this one meditation, as you can look at it as it's clouds in the sky. It has no bearing on you because you are that essence. You are the sky. You are one. And this is just something that's passing through. And you can either hang on to it or you can just let it go. And I think that's a very simplistic way. And I'm very careful about how I use that metaphor, because when somebody is facing a severe cancer diagnosis, the last thing they want is a hippy-dippy yoga person coming in and telling them to just imagine it all to go away. But I think there's some profound truth, and I really resonate with what Ilene and you are saying in this, that, there's so much we just don't know. And yet, as we get to know more about ourselves, we may find out something unique.
Yeah.
There was a psychiatrist in the military. I'm near Travis Air Force Base in California right now. That's where I'm staying. And he worked at Travis Air Force Base. I can't remember his name, although I did meet him. And he did some of the early research with cancer and emotions. And he had people visualize, like if you had cancer, he would ask you to visualize the good guys getting the bad guys. Like maybe your cancer was a roadbed made out of asphalt. So the good guys would come in with jackhammers and tear it up. And what he found was that some people got well from doing this. And what he found was that the people who created imaginations that actually were effective, like we're going to tear this roadway up versus, oh, I'm going to drip water on the asphalt and it's going to disappear after 4,000 years, that they got well. And what he also found, he was one of the first people who said the people who did not deal with anger in this process did not get well.
Yeah. Oh, I think about having spent many years as a people pleaser, and I would bottle everything up. And it was the straw that broke the camel's back, so it could be something really tiny, and I would explode. And for somebody who was basically shy and wouldn't sort of say boo to a goose, the explosion was such a release of energy that it left me totally drained and not proud of having such a horrendous temper. But I'm a Taurus, so sort of. But it didn't happen very often. But those people who witnessed it never wanted to see it again. And if they thought there was a chance Sarah was going to explode, they didn't want to be anywhere near. As I said, I'm not proud of that. But having realized what I've been doing, if something annoys me, I've got to find a way of releasing that. You know, if it means saying something to somebody, it doesn't mean we've got to get really angry about it, but it means obviously expressing ourselves and why this doesn't work for us. And I don't bottle anymore. And it's made a massive difference. But I also don't listen to things like the news. I don't read the news. You know, I don't watch the news. I don't have anything to do with the news if I can help it. If you're on the internet, you're going to see things. But it's take the negative stuff out of your life as best you can. Things are going to niggle you. Yes, they are. The people who cut you up, people who pull out junctions when they shouldn't do. You know, it was just like, release to the light with love. You know, sort of, and that tends to be my thing. You know, I'm in a hurry and so the traffic lights turn red. It's finding a positive. It's that, okay, I've asked the angels for support. The lights have gone red. Somebody requires it more than I do. They're clearing the road in front of me. It wouldn't have been safe for me to be on the road at that point in time. I'm sure there are numerous other reasons, but it's going into a positive thought. It's being done either for somebody else's benefit who needs it more, or it's being done for my benefit. And accepting it. And I think it's how do we rearrange our lives or rearrange our thoughts, which I think takes us into the moving into a more heart-minded approach to life. Because a lot of things we may think are against us, could they actually be for us? Denyse.
So I've been thinking a lot about this heart-mind, and I'm always amazed that when you start to focus your attention, there's a saying that where the attention goes, the energy flows. And I've just, in my recuperation from my recent surgery, I've been doing a lot of reading. And one of the books I just stumbled across, I think I've mentioned it to you before, is by Beth Kempton called Kokoro, which is the Japanese word, which doesn't translate precisely in English, but it's heart intelligence. And I had already decided that this was something I was going to dig into when I read the book. And I mean, my book now is, you know, tons of Post-its, underlined, everything. I don't think this concept came from this book. I think it came from another source that I read that I resonated with. And it said that when you are focused on the mind, which so much of our modern world is, we're logical beings, we're trying to make sense of things. The mind loves to create a sense of separateness because that's how it keeps its importance. And the heart is more encompassing. So part of what I've been trying to do, because when I think about it, when I was younger, I was very intuitive. And even in my workforce, my work world, one of the reasons I did well in the work I did is I approached things from an intuitive perspective, and everybody else I worked with were engineers. And I would see things differently, and I would say it, and everybody would look at me and say, well, what's the equation? And I'm like, well, there isn't an equation. Didn't you see how that guy spoke to this guy? And I saw that, and that's what happened. But I got away with that initially, but as I rose up, I had to give rational explanations. And I guess it hit me at one point that I had bought into the importance of the mind in one of my job roles where we were launching a new product and we had a major technical issue, and our product was being launched in New York City when 9/11 hit. And I had a technical team in our conference room solving the problem. We all got called up to the front of the building to see what was happening. I looked at it. I felt horrible. I was sad. I immediately turned and thought, but we got to solve this problem. And I went back to the conference room And of course, all the airports are shut down. The company that had the solution to our problem was in Boston. We were in New York State. And I go to my deputy and I said, well, all the airports are closed, but we can drive to Boston tonight and get up there, and we can have this problem probably fixed in 48 hours. And of course, we had a workforce that was in Brooklyn, right in the line of sight of the towers. Nobody was doing any work except for this little mind. And my colleague looked at me and he said, Denyse, I can't do that to my family. Do you realize what just happened? I can't leave them now in this uncertainty. And it was like, I should have had a V8, which was an old US commercial. It was like, how did it get to be this way? I'm not that person. People matter more than this task. And that was a real big wake up to, I need to reevaluate a lot of things in my life. Now, did I do it, make the change right away? No, but it's just like that recognition of the emotion. It happened. It got me curious. I went in a deep dive to figure out what it was all about. And one of the things I found through yoga, as you were both saying, they say in yoga, the issues are in the tissues. And I remember at one point in my yoga therapy training, a friend of mine who was actually Buddhist, she's like, okay, we did case studies on one another. She's, okay, Denyse, get down into child's pose, and I want you to surrender. And I just burst into tears. It was like, what the heck this is not me. What is going on? And I said something to the instructor, and he said, Denyse, this is not mysterious. He said, you spent 40 years in the defense industry. You're taught that surrender is a cowardiceness. You're now just acknowledging all of what you are. And to me, that was like, that event happened like 8 years after my first recognition, but things started to come around full circle. And I certainly don't have the answers, but the work I do one-on-one with people who are chronically ill, I'm just amazed at how much wisdom shows up when you least expect it. And so for whatever time left I have on this earth, and I'm sorry, I have the flu, that's why my voice is a little scraggly. For whatever time I have left in this earth, I just want to find as much joy and love as I can. And if I have a story that resonates with others, find a way to share it. And I think in doing so, then you're connecting to that heart center. And again, what I had to get used to in the military world, you're frequently compartmentalized because you have clearances and you can't know what this person's doing, what this person's doing. And it dawned on me at the end of my career, I spent my career compartmentalizing myself for the situation I was in. And now I say that whatever time is left is all about the integration. How do I figure out how I can be that better person, a better family member, a better friend, and do what's important in life. So that's kind of where I'm at. You may ask, at 70 years old, why did it take you so long? Well, I've always been a slow learner, but at least I figure it out eventually.
I don't think that you are a slow learner. And, let me cop to being 82 now, not 70. And, the reality is it takes as long as it takes. And if you're 70 or 80 or 60, people weren't even thinking about this stuff. I can't begin to tell you, in the 80s, I was trying to tell people anger's important, and I'd have to educate them that anger was important before I could talk to them about what I thought was important about it. So we've come a long way, and I don't think you're late. I think you're right on time. And wherever anybody is, they're right on time. I want to add also to this conversation that my focus now for the rest of my life is to help us understand that we don't have to work as hard as we've been talking about. We have worked. We don't have to work as hard with emotions as we think we do. In the other book that I wrote, I talk about the earth being a giant school. The system kind of goes like this. We have an experience. And with the experience, emotions come up. We don't own emotions. It's not my anger or my fear. It's the anger that comes up in me, the fear that shows itself. Okay. And those emotions arise because they each emotion has a different message. Anger, as we talked about before, says you've got an incorrect idea about how the world works and you need to take some action. Loneliness says you've got more energy going out than coming in. You need to do something that fills you, bring it in by maybe doing something you have a talent for. All right. So every one of these groups of emotions, and that's what I talk about in my book, Emotions in Motion, it has a message. And when we use the message, it decodes the experience we just had. And when we decode the experience, then we can make changes, and the energy that's involved with the emotion is set free to move on. I mean, it's such a simple thing. So then we don't have to go back and remind ourselves of this or that or the other. We can if we want to, but you know, because emotions are energy, you can't get rid of energy. So you can never totally get rid of anger or totally get rid of fear or any other emotion. But in my experience, you can take it if it's this big, you can bring it down to this big. And my learning, now that I've been working with this for over 50 years, is I almost feel like I don't have anger. Because number one, it doesn't arise very often because I've let the energy go, so it doesn't pile up the way you were describing, Sarah. And number two, I'm, it doesn't arise, and I also know what to do when it does arise. I know, for example, if I feel angry, I start looking for what do I think should happen, what do I think should not have happened, and I can move through it that way. And so it takes me maybe 3 to 5 minutes to deal with any anger that comes up, and then it just moves on through. And the more you do this kind of work, the less of a stockpile of emotional issues you have. And one more thing I want to say is, Sarah, regarding the solar plexus, I agree with you. To me, the solar plexus is a power center, and especially if somebody was brought up in manipulative circumstances with manipulative parents, manipulative friends. It's like a cesspool. One of the signs that I teach people to know that they're being manipulated is they get a knot or a tingling in the solar plexus, because that's the first place we feel it. And that's what I was building up listening to you guys. So thank you.
Thinking about it is about the heart, and we've been very much taught, haven't we, to live from this. I don't know about either of you, but I don't ever remember being told it was okay. In fact, it was essential to love ourselves. In respect of women, we're meant to be there for everybody else, become the mother, whatever. But men, the men are affected by this as well. They're meant to be the breadwinner. They're meant to be the ones that go out, and obviously, yes, our age groups, sort of very much a matter of sort of, we're from that era where the wife stayed at home, and sort of, well, my mother certainly did, although she did eventually go out nursing, but my mother stayed at home, sort of. And I'm sure your mother's stayed at home rather than going out to work. But then we've got to the stage where we've gone out to work. We've worked. And so things change. And there have been so many changes, but we're never taught not only that it was okay to love ourselves, but it was essential to love ourselves. And it is essential for each and every one of us It's not a selfish thing to love yourself. In fact, it's almost the selfless thing to do, because the more love, the care, consideration, trust in ourselves, belief in ourselves that we can bring to ourselves, the more we can bring out in beautiful energies to others. And we can be a support in a much healthier way than the way we've been taught to be, that constantly doing for others and being there for others, but never being there for ourselves and doing for ourselves. We haven't been taught that we're beings, not doings. And I think that's very much what you were talking about, Denyse. You were a doing.
Yes.
You just missed on being.
Yeah, I was definitely a human doer. I didn't know what being was about for a good several decades in my life.
Yeah. And I hope that the people that listen to this, and the Gifts of Wisdom book and so many other, there's so much support from true life and real life stories that we share. And I remember hearing Bo Eason say that at the Messenger Summit back in 2012, it is the storytellers. And I've heard that from other people as well. It is the storytellers, the people who tell their stories, who will be the ones that really make the difference in other people's lives, because people will see that they aren't on their own. They will also become aware that individuals have had, if not similar experiences, the similar feelings and emotions that they've gone through with what they're experiencing at that point in time. And they can see that people have been able to get beyond that, and it will support them. And yes, normally we would have sort of Scott here for the male perspective. And it's very important to realize this isn't a conversation about any gender. It is a conversation for each and every person right here on this planet. If it supports people to love themselves, and that helps you to bring so much more love. We're taught to seek love outside ourselves. We look for people to praise us. Why aren't we doing that for ourselves?
You know, along with that, I would like to point out something about you, Denyse, that I just kind of clicked in for me. You were talking about being a doer and not a beer, but there is a wisdom, and there was a wisdom in you starting at age 16 at least, where you set into motion the being side of yourself. You didn't emphasize it as much as you are now, but it was there, and it is a wisdom that happened in you that at the time you may not have recognized as this is a wisdom. I'm going to be focusing on doing, but I'm going to be cultivating the being part of myself so that I can also have that. And that's where you are now. And I want to bring it out because I think it's true of all of us if we will but pay attention to what's going on with us and give ourselves permission, like you did, to start yoga when you're 16 because it interested you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point, Eileen. What happened is because of where I was doing, yoga was not cool. But when things hit a boiling point, guess where I would go? I would escape and go on a yoga retreat. And when people would ask me where I was, I said, oh, I'm trying to lose weight. I went to a fat farm, because people understood that more than going to do a yoga to get a peace of mind. I mean, yoga is what brought me back to myself on more than one occasion. But because of my doing, I didn't create the space in my life to let it be on a regular basis like I have it now. And, part of what we're taught as we do the studies is true yoga is not when you're on the mat. It's how you live your life. And so that's how, when I talk about yoga, everybody's sitting there like, oh, are you going to put me in a lotus position? Hell no, I don't do a lotus position. But we are going to look at, how do we find wholeness within ourselves? What is it that connects us to our true self? And what I'm forever grateful for, I've had amazing meditation teachers who have said, you don't have to sit on the pillow. You can go out for a walk in nature. And as a matter of fact, I teach a course at one of the local hospitals on diabetes prevention, which is about stress reduction. And not only do I bring in the yoga techniques, but I offer a ton of different techniques for contemplative practices, that there's so many options we have if we just find what works best for us.
Yeah.
Which is going through the heart, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What you really enjoy. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. It really is. We're coming to a close of the program, and obviously I'd like to give each of us a chance for any sort of closing thoughts. So, Ilene, let's start with you.
Well, we're so much in the flow. I don't want to close down, tell you the truth, but what do we need? I think the most important thing is, a lot of us have been taught that working with emotions is difficult. And the difficult part of working with emotions is dealing with the emotions that have piled up inside of us while we were holding on to them. And now, if we turn them loose, people get afraid. They're going to be destructive. They're going to hurt people. And there's wisdom in that, because you can hurt people. And, like you were talking about when you exploded, Sarah Jane, anger, energy can be very destructive. But we can get help with that. We can go to a therapist, or we can. I knew a man once who was working on his anger, and he was renting a house that used to be owned by a banker, and they had a walk-in safe room in the house, and he would go in there, and he would have his other half lock him in the room so he could throw himself all around the room and scream and holler to whatever level he needed to. And then he would come out, and the energy would have dissipated. And then we learn how to keep the energy moving, which is what I've been talking about today. We just need to keep the energy moving. And the easiest way to keep it moving is to notice it, name it if you want to, learn about it, imagine. One last thing is a quote or a saying that I developed. It was my sign-off line on my podcast, and that is to pay attention not to what you want to overcome, but to what you want to become. And when we go to make changes, we usually look at the problem. That's what we want to overcome. And like you said before, whatever you pay attention to, you tend to feed it energy, and it grows, Denyse. And so when we're looking at what we want to overcome, we're feeding it energy, it's growing. But when we're looking at what we want to become, like, what would I be like if I didn't feel angry? What would I be like? How would I feel if I didn't have a pile of yuck in my solar plexus? Just entertaining that feeds energy to where you're going. And that's what we all want to do.
Denyse.
I love that, Ilene. Thank you. Part of what you were saying made me think. I'm trying to think of who the author is. It's the gentleman who wrote Buddha Brain, and in that he made the comment that the mind gravitates towards the negative. It's like Velcro.
Mm-hmm.
The negative sticks and the positive is like Teflon. And part of that's a survival mechanism, because we needed that in a previous civilization to keep ourselves safe. But we have the luxury now of tapping into the whole person. And it is a journey. And I like not what you're trying to overcome, but become, because there's that being word again. I think for me, to really get in touch with this, because it was really hard to let go of that head place of comfort. I started to think about words that I wanted more of. I mean, it's very much like Jeanette in our book with her words of the year. I didn't consciously have a word of the year, but when I read the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu's The Book of Joy, I adopted joy. And as soon as I started welcoming joy into my life, all of a sudden that heart center also opened up. And guess what? The mind felt a little bit clearer as well. So I just felt like there was a better flow of that energy, and I could look at things from a calmer perspective. I didn't overreact the way I frequently did before. And it's what we often call centering, knowing where that center is. What for some people it's the heart, for some people it's the solar plexus. We're all different. But wherever that point is, it could be the feet, that sense of grounding that makes us know who we are. And hopefully along the way, even if it's hard, we've learned to throw a little love in there for ourselves as well. Then I think that's what makes life worth living.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you used grounding, because I was thinking, yes, grounding is something that's so worth doing. I do it twice a day. The thought that came to me was, we're here having human experience. Whatever you do, don't beat yourself up, because we have the mind, because that is part of this experience. For me, our heart is our connection to our soul, which is the connection to all that is. But the mind is what's that aspect of us that is having this human experience. So it's work with it, encourage it. To me, it's encourage your mind to work with your heart. And I because I just say this on a daily basis, I have to try and think about it. It's along the lines of thank you for a mind that works with my heart. And it's not the perfect words. It's not the words I say, but because I say it so automatically, then when I try to think about it, I can't remember it. But it's encouraging the mind to work with the heart, the head to work with the heart. But don't beat yourself up, because you're here to have experiences. You talked, Denyse, about sort of, oh, why did it take so long? And I've come to this so late. As Ilene said, it's perfect timing. If all of us had been at 16 and got to this point, how much help could we really be to people of our age group who are still in the old place rather than tapping into the new heart place? So I think we're here sharing at the ages we are, because that is exactly what we're meant to be doing, to support the younger people of today, to hopefully get there a little bit quicker than we did.
Can I just add something? For me personally, it's been such an honor to get to know both of you more and to have this exchange. I can't thank you enough.
Hear, hear. I agree. And it's been a pleasure for me also. Thank you, Sara, for pulling this together. And let's give a huzzah to David McLeod,
yes.
Also.
Our tribal leader.
Absolutely. No, thank you to both of you for agreeing. It's been a real pleasure. We were really lucky that there were times where we actually got together while the book was being created. But we've obviously been able to have a much more fulfilling conversation, because it has been the three of us. Sort of, Scott, hope you're having a great time.
We'll catch
We
you on the
barely
replay,
missed
Scott.
Yeah, we barely missed you, but we do love you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, and I'm going to put your website addresses into the chat, and I will make sure that they're under the video. So folks, if you're watching the replay, please do feel free sort of to connect with our two ladies. if you feel drawn to check what they're doing, what's going on. Next week, I am being joined by Bradford Tilden, and he is going to be sharing Lemurian, seed crystals and the mastery within. And I'm really I love all these conversations. This one's going to be an interview, but you can learn so much, and that's why I sort of love doing this. So thank you to you, both of you. Folks,
thank you.
Feel free to join us for any of the programs. All the previous programs are on the Gift of Healing TV website. Thank you to you both. It's been a real pleasure, as always.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.